1674, pretty high rated opponent here. All right, let's go e4. e4, e5, and let's see how the... Okay, so never mind. There's not going to be 4 knights. There's going to be a Philidor. What do we do in this position? There's 2 good moves, and oftentimes they transpose into each other. So the way to quote-unquote punish the Philidor, of course, this is not a reputation, but this is the way to get an advantage, is to strike in the center with d4. Knight takes d4, and we have better control of the center, great position. And, okay, so there's multiple setups here that are considered quite good. One is to put the bishop on f4 and then play queen d2, but there's a setup that kind of flies under the radar, which I think is extremely nasty for black, and that is to... Thank you, Bav. That is to fianchetto the bishop g3. g3, bishop g2. And the idea is basically that the bishop collaborates with the pawn and makes it very difficult for black to free himself in the center with d5. So I like fianchettoing my bishop in the Philidor. Okay, c5. So classic move, but I think it's a mistake. Why is it a mistake? No, it's a positional error. It creates a backward pawn on d6. That pawn was already kind of weak. Now it's backward. And correspondingly, it creates a very weak square on d2, not on d5. Now, with that in mind, where should we put the knight? This is a pretty important decision. We shouldn't just throw it on a random square. We should try to make the knight work for us as efficiently as we can. So knight f5 allows bishop takes f5. I'm not sure this trade is in our benefit. I like knight e2, because from here the knight can go to f4 and obviously control the d5 square. I think this is a better square than b3. Now, do we need to rush with knight f4? Is this something we need to do right this moment? No. First, it makes sense to complete our development. Let's castle. And it would also make sense to play h3. Okay, bishop g4. So we're not too worried about bishop takes e2. That's not that scary. If we were worried about it, we could play f3 here, but I don't particularly want to play f3. Let's play h3 to chase the bishop away. If bishop takes e2 happens, what should we take with? Interesting question. Because both pieces can recapture, but there is one recapture that I like a little bit more than the other. Let's see what people come up with here. And these are already like high-level positional decisions that, you know, as a 1700, you should start learning how to make. Yeah, I like the idea of taking with the knight. If we take with the queen, you're kind of walking into knight d4 with tempo. It's not the end of the world, but it's also a little bit unpleasant. And we're still not allowing d5 here. We've got 3 defenders on that square and only 2 attackers. Queen b6. So a really good setup here is not only to reroute the knight to f4, as some people are indicating, but also to restrict the knight on c6 as much as possible. How do we restrict that knight? A concept I've talked about on many occasions, this particular pawn arrangement. We play the move c3, right? Now the pawn is controlling the knight's 2 advancing squares. Knight e5, this is kind of aimless. Now we could go f4, but then that would deprive the knight of that square. I think f4 is too hasty. Now, we want to develop our bishop. It would be nice to develop our bishop, let's say, to e3 or even to g5. But we can't do that because we dropped the b2 pawn. Okay, so you might be thinking about b3, but we can actually make a move that prepares to connect the rooks, and it also defends the b2 pawn. So it kind of kills 2 birds with 1 stone. It's a harmonious move, and that's queen c2. And it prepares a couple of different things. It prepares the move rook d1, which reinforces our control over the d5 square. And a rook on d1 is better than a queen on d1. And it gets the queen out of the way. And, of course, it frees up the bishop. Okay, knight c4. Pointless. I mean, black is preventing us from getting our bishop out. We can play b3 whenever we want to chase the knight away. But we don't have to rush. And this is something I want to emphasize. We don't have to rush with b3. How can we improve our position instead? Let's practice not rushing a tempting move. How can we improve our position? I've already mentioned this move. Swag fun, thank you. Okay, so knight f4 is one idea. But let's try to play as flexibly as possible. Let's start with rook d1. And you can see that this knight is not causing us any damage. Right? We can play b3 at any moment. All right, I think now is a good time to play b3. I just wanted to emphasize that there was no rush. But now that I've emphasized it, let's go b3. I'm tired of this knight. Let's get it out of there. now we continue our development. Now, where should we put our bishop? Well, you can put it on g5 and trade for the knight on f6 and try to get your knight to d5. That's one approach. But giving black the dark squared bishop here, I think, is a little bit imprudent because we'd be left with not a great light squared bishop. I don't see a need to give away our bishop. Let's just go bishop e3. Let's develop it to a nice square where it x-rays the queen. Okay, queen c6. And now I think it's a good opportunity. We have a good opportunity to reinforce our control over the d5 square. What am I talking about? What does that mean? Reinforce our control over the d5 square. So knight f4, yes, is a possibility. But I'm also thinking of the move pawn c4, using our pawns to clamp down even further on that square. And now the knight has an even nicer path through c3. It doesn't interfere with the f pawn in case we want to play f4. Right? So this is a little bit more harmonious. Now, I know you're looking at this probably saying, aren't we afraid of weakening the d4 square? And the answer is no, because we have a bishop that guards it and we have a rook that guards it. Okay, knight b4. I'm going to speed up a little bit here. We're just going to move our queen. We can move it to b2. We can move it to e2. It doesn't really matter. Doesn't really matter. Let's move it to e2. And now let's focus on continuing to improve our position, putting more pressure in the center. What very typical plan allows us to increase the pressure, turn up the pressure dial in the center? What am I thinking about? g4, g5, yeah, g4, g5 is interesting, but, you know, let's be a little bit more Russian school of chess about this. Yeah, doubling rooks. Let's go rook d2, rook d1. I'm not committing to anything yet. I'm playing as flexibly as possible. I haven't really pushed any of my pawns yet. Okay, black is doing the same. I don't care about this. Knight can remain there for all at once. It's not worrying me at all. Now, if he doubles his rooks, okay, that's not a great move. Yeah, resigns. Okay, I don't know where that came from. But this is what happens when you put a lot of pressure on somebody, right? People kind of buckle under the pressure. Yeah, that is a strange blunder. I guess he thought that I moved the rook away from a1, so a2 is hanging now, but it's not. Very strange move. Not much to say about this game. I mean, this was a pretty classic Philidor. So we played g3. You guys can check this on your own, but I know that d5 is a move here, and I'm not sure what the evaluation is. I know d5, e5, knight g4 is a line. I think white's supposed to be better here, but this needs to be checked if you want to play g3. But most people don't know about this, so they end up castling. And c5 is already a mistake. I would say a lot of people under 2000 tend to play c5 in such positions, and this is the same exact, let's call it the same syndrome that causes people to play c5 in this position. A lot of people play c5 here. And I still think fundamentally it's connected to this urge to attack something, right? You're pushing a pawn and you're creating a threat. And it's just people not realizing that creating a threat is not an inherently good thing, right? It has nothing to do with, in order to judge a move, it's not enough to say that it creates a threat. It can be a good thing, but it can also be an incredibly harmful thing. Does that make sense? They want the presence in the center, but this move is an illusion. It doesn't actually control the center. It actually weakens the center. So be very careful about that. And the only reason you would play c5 is if you could follow up with d5 and break through in the center. I mean, this just creates a massive hole on d5. Now, we did a couple of things. So we took with the knight in order not to allow this move with tempo. And this centralizes the knight. So why is this also a good move? Because it centralized the knight. And also, I was already gearing up to play c3 and restricting the knight. Okay, so queen c2, freeing up the bishop, activating the rook, chasing away the knight, developing the bishop, reinforcing the pressure on the d5 square. Same ditto for knight c3, getting the queen out of the attack, and then doubling rooks. I mean, really, all we did was very natural play. Rook bd8, we had a nice idea here I wanted to show. I was excited to play this during the game. Fortunately, it was ruined. Can anybody tell me that we have a nice little maneuver here? And you can find this by identifying, you know, the white piece that's not really doing anything and trying to find a home for it. This is a classic idea. So it's too early for e5. e5, d5, the rook has enough defenders. Yeah, h4, bishop h3. So we go h4, and then we reroute the bishop to h3, kicking away the rook. And then e5 becomes a problem. So for example, after bishop h3 rook c7, now e5 is a big issue because black can't take. So, and knight b5 is coming, and this is already very, very nasty. The one maneuver like this can really make a difference. And in general, this is something to remember. This idea of pushing out the h pawn and going bishop h3 or bishop h6. I guess we're just going to use my desktop mic. Sorry. Hopefully the audio quality is okay. So anyways, all I was going to say is this idea of playing h4, bishop h3 is actually very strong in a lot of positions. I wanted to give an example of one of my games where I applied the same concept, but in a very different instantiation. So here's an example of where I did something similar. This is one of my games, 2019, and I'm playing black here. All right, so it's black to move here. And basically, I'm going to walk you through quickly through the essence of the position. There's a lack of equivalency. Black has this d4 square, which is really, really weak. But if you compare it to the d5 square, well, the d5 square is not weak at all, right? The d5 square is easily guarded by the c6 pawn. So ideally, I came up with a plan here of trying to get a knight to d4, but there is a lot of problems associated with that plan. White has 3 pieces that are all guarding the d4 square, so it seems pretty unrealistic. But it actually is realistic. And you want to go piece by piece. So we have the move rook a d8 in our pocket to, cancel out white's rook. White's knight can be canceled out by playing c5 at some point. But what about white's bishop? Can you find a plan that allows you to trade white's bishop? And this is where this concept comes in. Yeah, very good. You guys are getting it immediately. I played h5, king h7, and bishop h6. I was like using the king for stuff. Make the king work a little bit. And then once this happens, white is left with the bad bishop, and then I go c5 and knight d4. So this works, like clockwork. And the king is safe. It can always drop back to g7. So that's the bottom line. This idea of getting the bishop to h3 or h6 can be quite nice. And that's all I wanted to say. I mean, obviously, once you blended the knight, it was over. I would do more, but I want to get some sleep. Enjoy Gari's stream, guys. Thanks for hanging out. And that's all I have to say. Thank you, folks. Thanks for watching me practice. We'll do my best tomorrow.